Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to have to do a bit of explaining first. My day job is a lecturer. I work at John Moores University, but I'm also doing my PhD about anthrozoology, so that's what I'm talking about today, not about the poverty strategy or anything like that. Interesting to me, background to this, I've been studying this for about 3 years now. I've been talking to teachers, head teachers, children, also parents about animal experiences for primary age children. I have looked at this in England in particular, and I spent a lot of time working my way through websites of schools and talking to schools by telephone, and decided it was rather large. So I decided to focus more on one particular area in England, the Merseyside region. If you're not familiar with England and Merseyside, it involves Liverpool, but also some other regions, and it's quite diverse. We have some of the poorest sections within Merseyside, but also the most affluent. So within 2 miles of each other, we've got extreme poverty with multi-million-pound homes very close to each other. So it's a good place to do a bit of research to see generally what the status is in England. I did start with some quantitative research, and I sent out some questionnaires as a survey. And the response rate was reasonable. I got 57 questionnaires back with quite a lot of data. And it answered my main research question at the time, which is what's going on with animals in primary schools. Now, the reason I asked this question and why I constructed the survey was because as a liaison tutor, somebody who was visiting teacher trainees, I'd noticed ad hoc that there were very few class-situated animals. And I asked the teachers why this might be, and it was difficult to gather at the time enough data just talking one-on-one. So I put a survey out to find out a little bit more. Unfortunately, from the data in the survey, it raised more questions than it answered. So I thought the next phase would be to do some qualitative research. So I spent time with primary school teachers, with current class teacher responsibilities, ground level teachers. They ranged from reception 4-5 up to year 6 to age 10 or 11. And I spoke to them in quite a lot of detail about their perspective about whether children and animals should go together within primary education. Now, in order to start the interviews, it was important that I first got a feel for where their viewpoint was as an individual. So I used a lot of, it's a visual ethnography where I show pictures. I can use these because these involve my own children and friends. So this was an interesting one because I know the context of this photograph, and I know in some people there's a reaction to this kind of visual stimulus. Also, this one, it tells a story because actually the little girl is holding a butterfly, but the butterfly is no longer alive. Now, the broad smile, but also if you look carefully, the little girl on her side, the horror on her face. So what it did was it was a nice icebreaker with the teachers to talk generally about their perspectives before we went further on with the questions. I thought it was also important to provide a screening situation. So, for example, we talked about this continuum of where they sit. So, for example, did they find that they were fearful about having children and animals together generally, or actually were they very animal orientated themselves and they knew that they absolutely think it's the best thing that could happen for children? So it was important to put themselves in a position along that continuum. Okay, I also asked them about the term educational anthrozoology, and of the 10 teachers that I spoke to, not one knew what this term was. I shortened it to anthrozoology, and again, I had one teacher eventually decode. She got the zoology, the anthro, and she worked back. But on a whole, none of the teachers that I spoke to or since have heard of the term. They were able to identify, when we talk generally about the experiences that children have within education, they were able to talk about the possible benefits. They identified, therapeutic approaches, other experiences with animals. for children that needed extra support, but they also recognised the value for all children, for all typical children. But every conversation that we had eventually led to, how does this relate to the curriculum that I teach? So every benefit, they were always relating back to their primary role as educator within a curriculum framework. Okay, the teachers that I spoke to were very aware of the emotional effective value of having children and animals together within the primary setting. Okay, they didn't use this phrase in particular, but they all said something similar about how the bond or attachment that a child can have with an animal can be as strong or influential as those with parents, grandparents, siblings or peers. So often I shared this quote from Levinson just to say, yes, other people have been saying this too. Teachers were also able to explain that they felt there were cognitive benefits and values about working through issues with children, about animals that come into the world, animals that we eat, how animals and pets, pass on. So they recognised the value for cognitive development, but also the interplay. They talked an awful lot within the interviews about how animals can be used as a vehicle to explain about humane education and things like how to look after an animal, about empathy, about sensitivity. So they recognise all of those benefits. All the teachers that I spoke to were very keen on the idea of having animals with children, especially within the school setting. But there were no animals at all in the settings that I visited, which is in line with what I've noticed a lot in Merseyside in particular anyway. And some of the comments that they gave shed some light on why this might be. The main one, and this is what I hear an awful lot, the last comment, I was under the impression that animals were not permitted, comes from somewhere. They don't know where, but they just feel the reason why they don't have animals on site visiting or continuous is that they're not allowed to be there. Okay. The teachers were able to identify themselves as a key person. They recognise that as the professional, they have the ability to model and scaffold understanding with children. They can provide contextual knowledge, they can scaffold learning, model the behaviour that is required around an animal that maybe children won't have accessed, or maybe they've had a difficult model or a model that's not appropriate, should I say. It can also equip children with the social and cognitive tools to apply skills in the future. So they're there to talk through with the children how they may act in the future. They're very aware of teachable moments, that sometimes you need a situation with an animal to springboard that deeper philosophical discussion that you have even with very young children. So for example, if you had an animal that had died, to be able to talk through it rather than brush over it is to be able to talk with children about it and make it a meaningful experience for the life course. Okay, I spoke to teachers about whether they recognised a difference when we talk about animal experiences, what are we meaning? I separated out this idea of animal-related learning, having films and books and cuddly toys, versus the more interactive opportunities with animals. I also asked the teachers to talk to me about the experiences that they were aware of, whether they've done them in the school before or in other schools. Quite often they talked about school trips out to the zoo, to farms, or other animal-related experiences, bringing visitors into schools. So, for example, the owl man would come in, bring reptiles in. Wildlife conservation and protection of animals was mentioned, but one of the teachers did say to me that actually that it usually is assigned to one particular teacher has a passion for it, and if that member of staff isn't in the school, then it quite often doesn't happen. What I was surprised about, all the teachers, every single one I spoke to, said that they hadn't heard of a medical assistance animal or a therapy animal, okay, and they'd not heard about programs such as the Read Dogs, where there's an assistance animal there within the classroom. Okay, I thought this was common knowledge because it is within our community, something that we're very aware of and talk about all the time. But for the ground level primary teachers in England, okay, this is something that they're not aware of, and I end up being someone who brings information. For example, have you heard of the pat dogs, or maybe you'd like to try this or that or the other, and we kind of pause the interview for that reason. So this has got me thinking quite a bit about what's happening. And I asked them about the direction and the directives that they'd had. And when we looked at the primary curriculum, you can see that there is very little reference to animals at all anyway. We've got the life and living processes, obviously, within science. Within our early years curriculum, they don't really mention it at all, apart from if you have animals, you must make sure the children are safe. Okay, so they are the only references in the English curriculum. Okay, and there isn't really anybody within the primary profession in primary education in England that actually is vocal about this and talks about, or even looks to introduce children and animals and bring them together more. I did ask my close question, because this was my hypothesis. I did say to the teachers, do you feel it's because of the way that the curriculum has taken over primary education in England? You know, we have pressures, as it may be in other countries, I know, where that the teachers feel that they must deliver subjects and gain attainment, meet the targets set to them by senior managers for literacy and numeracy. And so where the priorities are running the experiences that children have in primary school. So therefore, animals will almost fall in the shadow of this, that actually they're kind of forgotten with the overemphasis and priority for getting children through into the grades that they need. They're just forgetting about these other wonderful experiences. And the teachers did say that actually, yes, they agreed with this, but it actually came quite far down in the list of concerns. Thank you. Obviously, always at the top is the allergies issue, the reason why maybe there aren't animals involved within primary education, safety of children, possible litigation, hygiene issues. This came up an awful lot, responsibility and care during school holidays. They weren't prepared to take that holistic view, and consideration of parental wishes, fear of what parents may say or do, okay, if something were to happen. Okay, but they did list an awful lot of benefits as well. Okay, so my general findings have been that teachers are aware of the developmental outcomes of children and animals together in primary education, and they do see that there is a value to children having a companion animal or a pet. Okay, but there's very low awareness of what we know as animal-assisted therapy and those other approaches. And about animal-assisted animals as well, there's a very low awareness. And there's no action at all towards doing anything about it. Okay, so this has been a burning question for me quite recently. So I'm bringing this all together in my mind about the feeds of information that teachers are getting, the piecemeal information that they get from the media, the negative reflection from the media usually. They have this understanding about the Welfare Act, but they don't know enough about it. Okay, they don't have this idea that there's another way that actually animals and children together can be managed and it can be safe. Okay. They're certainly not engaging with the research. They're not accessing the literature. I don't think many teachers read anthrozoos or other they just don't know about it. They don't know it existed. So how can they move past this and learn more and be more secure with moving forward? So for me, it's an issue of support and professional ownership. Okay, I'm starting to wonder, and this is why I'm talking to you today, to see if you can help me with this, make sense of it. But maybe teachers need to have within their training, or as something that they engage with as part of their ongoing professional development, maybe somebody needs to talk to them about the value of animals, because I don't think that's happening at the moment. I've been acting as an advocate. I've been going around, as I finished interviews, I've been kind of instructing and making them aware of things that I just assumed teachers were aware of. Okay, because we are. I always end the interviews with a set of questions, and I don't say these are questions for you, these are the questions I'm struggling with, can you help me? But it's also there to trigger an awareness for the future, okay, direct them in maybe the right direction. I asked them, should primary teachers include anthrozoology in their work? Would the inclusion of animals as a core area to get its promotion bring added value? Are animal-assisted direct activities necessary, or are distance activities enough? Are they safe and are they good enough? Okay, I'm also worried about this issue here. Those children that are particularly attuned to animals, we call them gifted and talented in England. Okay, how do we identify them? If they're never with animals within the primary setting, how are teachers going to ever be able to identify them and extend them? Because they're going to be our anthrozoologists in the future. Okay, and nobody's picking up on this. So that's one area, potential area for research, maybe for someone else. Okay, thank you.